Hey guys, tonight we set off across the vast and ancient landscape of the Silk Road, the winding artery that once stitched the world together with threads of silk, secrets, and sandalwood. You're not just watching history tonight, you're walking it. Imagine the moonlight pooling across endless dunes, the soft grunt of camels beside you, and that oddly comforting creak of leather saddles and wooden carts. You're swaddled in scarves to keep the dust out, your boots are already filled with sand, and your canteen. Well, let's just say you should have packed more water. This is the Silk Road, baby, and you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start walking just past twilight. The sun's dipped low, but there's still that sleepy amber glow along the horizon, just enough to turn the sand silver. You're part of a caravan now. It's not glamorous. Your job is mostly to not fall behind or accidentally step in camel droppings. But look around. That's not just any merchant yawning beside you. He's hauling lapis lazuli, deep blue stones prized in faraway Italian churches. And that woman 2 paces ahead? Her veils are embroidered with patterns reserved for Tang Dynasty elites. You're in mixed company: Persian traders, Sogdian interpreters, maybe even a Mongol scout trying to blend in, with a suspiciously sharp bow strapped to his back. There's music, soft, stringed, plucked by tired fingers at the front of the line. Someone's humming in a language you don't know, and the rhythm of the camel's hooves settles into your body like a lullaby beat. The air is dry but somehow rich, like it's holding on to the ghost of every spice and every prayer whispered across this sand for centuries. The first major oasis comes into view, its palms swaying like sleepy guardians. The glow of fire pits casts long shadows, flickering like dancing ghosts across the tent walls. This is where caravans rest, restock, and gossip. You hear someone mutter that silkworms were smuggled in hollow bamboo poles. Yes, literally insect contraband. Silk wasn't just cloth, it was currency, technology, and sometimes political blackmail. And yet here you are, itchy from the scratchy wool you could afford, watching a silk-robed elder sip pomegranate wine and explain, with great gravity, the proper way to clean a saddle sore. Historians still argue whether the first full trade route from China to Rome was ever completed by a single merchant. Some say it was always a relay race, goods changing hands dozens of times. But standing here, under this open sky with stars that feel absurdly close, you realize that it doesn't really matter. Every step forward carries echoes from the step before. You're handed a dried fig from a trader with gold-capped teeth and a tattoo of a goat playing a flute. He tells you his family has walked this road for generations, though no one can remember where they started. His donkey carries nothing but salt blocks, a currency in their own right. In fact, in some desert kingdoms, salt was more precious than gold. Try seasoning your soup with a gold bar sometime, doesn't hit the same. You bed down in the sand, wrapped in a rough cotton cloak, your head resting on a bundle of bundled-up laundry you pretend is a pillow. It smells like cumin and regret. The sounds around you fade. The camels groan once more, the firewood cracks its sleepy rhythm, and someone is singing an old song about a trader who tried to sell peppercorns disguised as pearls. Spoiler, it did not go well. One traveler near you claims to have seen the ruins of a palace swallowed by the dunes. He says its mosaic floors still glint in the sun, and that the wind there whispers in 3 languages. Is it true? No one's sure. But the way he says it, like he's already halfway back there, you start to wonder if maybe the Silk Road doesn't just connect places but memories too. As the stars will slowly overhead, you find yourself drifting. Your last thought before sleep is oddly modern. How strange that something so ancient could feel so much like home. Your dreams? A blur of silk banners fluttering in desert wind, laughter in unfamiliar tongues, and one stubborn camel who insists you owe him 3 dates and an apology. By morning, the desert's changed personalities again. Gone is the soft silver lull of moonlight. Now it's a golden glare that seems to reflect off everything: sand, stone, even your own eyelids. You blink, stretch, and notice that someone has placed a bowl of goat milk tea near your feet. It smells faintly sour and absolutely necessary. You sip. It's warm, slightly smoky, and, if we're being honest, only barely better than camel spit. Still, you nod respectfully to the weathered nomad who brought it. He doesn't smile, but his eyebrow twitches in what might be approval. You're in the middle of a nomad encampment now. These aren't just pit stops. They're vibrant, flickering worlds of their own, folding and unfolding with the seasons like origami tents. Smoke curls from low fires where flatbread bakes on hot stones, and children chase each other through hanging rugs as though they're in the corridors of a palace. A man with a falcon perched on his wrist tells you stories of salt caravans stretching so far into the dunes they look like a trail of ants dragging treasure across the earth. His breath smells like cloves and his smile has too few teeth to be comforting. Still you listen. Because here, everyone's got a story and some of them might even be true. In this camp, everything's up for trade. Leather boots, fermented camel milk, a flute carved from a bird bone. You see a merchant negotiating with a child who insists her clay figurine is magical. He shrugs and trades her a pouch of almonds anyway. Deals don't always need logic. They just need trust, or exhaustion. Historians still argue whether these nomadic communities were the glue that held the Silk Road together or simply side characters in the saga of empire-building merchants. But when you see a Persian rug being haggled over next to a Chinese lacquer box and a Russian samovar used as a soup pot, you understand. Borders were suggestions here, not rules. A fringe fact for your travels. Ancient traders sometimes carried dried orange peels, not for snacking but to mask the smell of other traders who'd been on the road too long. You suddenly feel very judged by the one dangling from a hook on your own belt. As you wander past the animal pens, you notice a circle of elders huddled around a smoky fire. They're singing, low and haunting, and their voices blend with the wind. You can't understand the words, but somehow you know the song is about longing. Maybe for a lost homeland. Maybe just for a good nap. You join a younger group gathered nearby, where someone's playing a stringed instrument strung with horsehair. They're telling ghost stories, one about a merchant who vanished in the dunes, only to return years later, aged not a day, with a bag of coins from a kingdom no one had ever heard of. You glance over your shoulder just in case. The younger traders laugh easily, but behind their eyes there's always that glint of calculation. Even the storytellers know when to pause just long enough for you to consider buying a lucky charm. You do. It's shaped like a lizard and smells faintly of juniper and lies. One of the women, wrapped in layers of crimson and indigo, shows you a salt crystal the size of a fist. From the mine in Dashti Kavar, she says proudly. Supposedly, that salt is so pure it's used in purification rituals. You nod, pretending you didn't just use some of it to season your morning porridge. As the day stretches into late afternoon, the temperature spikes and tempers fray. You see two men arguing over a pair of boots, both right-footed of course. A third man settles it by suggesting they trade one each and walk in mismatched glory. Everyone cheers. No one wants violence today. It's too hot. You spend the hottest hour beneath a sun-bleached canopy, listening to a Sogdian woman explain how salt caravans used to be ambushed by tribes that didn't want the salt. They wanted the camels. She smiles and says, "Salt won't run away. Camels might." You make a mental note never to trust a particularly smug-looking dromedary nearby. By sunset, the camp has shifted again. Tents are rolled, goats are counted, deals wrapped in handshakes and head tilts. One trader sells you a pouch of what he calls desert pepper. It tastes like black pepper mixed with secrets. Probably not FDA approved, but undeniably zesty. You help pack the animals, mostly by staying out of the way, and hear one last song as the sun bleeds orange behind the dunes. This one is softer, like a farewell. Maybe it's for the sand, or the fire, or simply the comfort of people who understood what it meant to survive together, if only for one night. You trudge onward, your steps heavier but your heart oddly light. The dunes stretch again before you, but now you carry a piece of the nomad rhythm inside you. The quiet understanding that some journeys aren't about where you're going, but about who hands you goat tea when you're too tired to ask. And somewhere behind you, in the dying embers of a campfire, someone is telling the story of the wide-eyed traveler who bought a lizard charm and didn't even haggle. They laugh, but it's a kind laugh. You're moving again. The sky's a bruised purple now, and the wind carries a different scent, something warm and sweet and just slightly dangerous. It hits you in waves. Cinnamon, saffron, clove, a whiff of something floral and foreign that clings to the inside of your nose. You're entering the domain of the spice whisperers. As the terrain shifts from dry dune to cracked earth, small stalls start to appear like mushrooms after rain. No fanfare. Just small tents, spread out blankets, and baskets bursting with color. This isn't a major city, not yet, but a pocket trade post where merchants gather like migrating birds, all wings and chatter and secret knowledge. The first merchant you meet gestures toward a mound of crushed petals and mutters, "Persian rose." Calms the nerves, hides the scent of fear. You think he's joking. He's not. Spices here aren't just flavor. They're diplomacy, medicine, religion, and low-key espionage. You learn quickly that nutmeg was once worth more than gold ounce for ounce. Not because it made pie delicious, though yes, it absolutely did, but because Europeans believed it could cure the plague. Spoiler, it couldn't. But that didn't stop anyone from loading up entire ships with it and sailing across oceans. Historians still argue whether the initial craze for cloves began in the Indian Ocean or somewhere even more obscure, like the remote Maluku Islands. What's clear is this: wherever it started, it ended in profit, and often blood. You see a man holding what looks like a gnarled twig. He says it's long pepper, stronger than black and more honest. You nod, unsure what that means, but it feels profound. Someone's grinding cardamom pods beside you. The scent is sharp, like eucalyptus and poetry. You ask her where it's from. She shrugs and replies, "Somewhere green, I think. My brother sends it in sacks heavier than his wife." You think this is a joke. It definitely isn't. There's a tiny woman hunched beneath a striped canopy. Her fingers are stained ochre, her eyes sharp as obsidian. She sells custom spice blends, and insists she can make one for your exact emotional state. You say, "Tired and mildly overwhelmed," and she gives you a pouch that smells like comfort, chili, and whatever hope tastes like. Nearby, someone's arguing that cinnamon can also be used to preserve scrolls and repel snakes. Another trader counters that it attracts camels, which sounds unlikely but somehow plausible in this surreal space. A third just snorts and chews dried turmeric like it's bubblegum. A group of musicians play as the spice winds thicken. Their tune is fast and spiraling like a dance you forgot you knew. One instrument sounds like a lute trying to flirt. Another thumps like a heartbeat with something to prove. Someone sings a verse in Sanskrit, another replies in Arabic. You don't catch the words, but the meaning rings clear. Welcome, traveler. Watch your purse. The deeper you go into the market, the more bizarre the goods become. There's a jar of preserved limes with a handwritten note. Do not open during eclipse. Next to it, a tray of saffron strands so fine they look like sun rays trapped in thread. A vendor lets you sniff them, then demands you marry his cousin. You politely decline. A fringe tidbit floats into your ear from a toothless gossip trader. Some believe ancient spice routes were haunted, not by ghosts but by memory spirits, who would whisper forgotten languages into your dreams if you fell asleep too close to the incense stalls. You glance at the curls of smoke wafting around your ankles and decide to stay very awake. A fat merchant with a laugh like thunder tells you how certain royals used to bathe in rose water before trade negotiations. So the room smells like beauty, not lies. He pats your shoulder, hands you a single clove and says, "Chew it before you bargain. It sharpens the tongue. It tastes like fire and regret." You pass a stand selling powdered musk, another hawking dried orange blossoms sealed in beeswax. A quiet boy gestures for you to follow him. He leads you to a pile of star anise and whispers, "These make even poison taste sweet." You glance down. The stars sparkle like secrets. You buy two. There's a strange moment when you realize everything around you, every scent, every shimmer of powdered spice in the air, was once alive. A flower, a bark, a berry, plucked from its home and dried to become a whisper carried thousands of miles. And now here it is, tickling your nose, nestling in your satchel, changing hands like currency wrapped in myth. By dusk, the market simmers down. The wind carries trails of burnt myrrh and old stories. You sit on a stone, exhausted but buzzing, your pouch of spice blends warm against your hip like a friendly toad. Someone hands you a roasted date, stuffed with honeyed pistachio and wrapped in a fig leaf. It tastes like the sun taking a nap. You lean back, watching the shadows stretch long across the cracked ground, the scent of cinnamon still clinging to your sleeves. You wonder if you've just walked through a place or a spell. Maybe both. Your last image before sleep. Two merchants exchanging a small bottle of something dark and glowing. One calls it oil of secrets. The other just nods and slips it into a silk pouch as the stars begin their quiet parade. The next leg of your journey begins not with a footstep, but with a scent, a thick animal musk carried on the morning wind. It's subtle at first, a dry whisper of warmth and fur. Then it becomes unmistakable, the pungent presence of livestock. But not just any animals. You're entering the land of the caravans, where camels reign as kings with bad attitudes and bladders that obey no man. You rub the sleep from your eyes as the caravan leader, a wiry man with a voice like gravel and a turban wrapped 5 ways too tight, calls out instructions in a blend of Turkic, Persian, and something even older. No one answers. They're too busy arguing with their camels. Welcome to the backbone of the Silk Road, the beasts of burden and the grumbling souls who wrangle them. This is where goods truly move, not on ships or scrolls, but on the sloped backs of creatures who chew sideways and spit without warning. The desert caravan is a marvel of chaos. Picture this: 100 camels groaning like overworked opera singers, each draped with jiggling parcels of everything from bolts of silk to jars of pickled lemons. Donkeys trail behind like underpaid interns, and somewhere in the mess, a child leads a sheep that seems to think it's a horse. You join the column just as it begins to move. The pace is deliberate. Camels aren't known for their urgency, but they are known for endurance, and in this land of endless sand and sudden cliffs, that's what matters. You're told the average caravan covered 15 to 25 miles a day, though scholars still debate whether that estimate includes time lost to camel mutinies and impromptu nap breaks. The sun rises higher, and the caravan leader takes out what looks like a melted compass fused with a sundial and a spoon. Astrolabe, he grunts. Tells me when to stop. Also when to pray. You don't ask how it works. No one really knows, not even, some say, the guy who invented it. As you plod along, your feet crunch on crushed stone and the occasional shard of broken pottery. One of the merchants tells you that the Silk Road is littered with fragments of ambition. Pots that cracked, glass that melted, dreams that got buried in sandstorms. Camels fart. Loudly. You pretend not to hear it, but a few travelers give you knowing glances. It's a rite of passage. Some traders even claim that the more your camel farts, the luckier your cargo. You find this deeply suspicious. But then again, your charm lizard still hasn't burst into flames, so maybe it's working. By midday, the heat becomes biblical. Cloaks are drawn tighter, water rationed drop by drop. You find yourself marveling at how little separates you from collapse. One lost wineskin, one bad sandstorm, and your history. Literally. As in, found centuries later mummified in a perfect sandal pose kind of history. But you're not alone. Caravan life is community. People share figs, gossip, and occasionally lice treatments. One elderly trader lets you ride beside him on his elephantine camel, an unusually docile beast named Haroun. He tells you tales of when he was young and stupid enough to smuggle silk through mountain passes guarded by snow leopards. Now, he says, patting Haroun, I just sell thread and nap in the sun. He shows you a scroll of trade calculations written in multiple languages: Chinese, Persian, Sogdian, even Greek. Historians still argue whether merchants like him were multilingual geniuses or just had amazing cheat sheets. Either way, you're impressed. A fringe detail he shares: the wealthiest traders sometimes stitched gold threads into their robes, so if they were ever robbed, they could unravel their own clothes and survive a few extra weeks. Also made funerals very awkward, he adds with a grin. As evening creeps in, the caravan stops near a half-buried well that only the old men seem to know exists. Water is hauled up in ancient buckets that groan like dying whales. You wash your hands and splash your face, the coolness electric against your skin. Somewhere nearby, a woman is boiling lentils with dried apricot. The smell is divine. You offer to trade a story for a bowl. She accepts. Later, campfires flicker across the dunes like stars fallen to earth. Traders sit in small circles, counting coins, comparing spice samples, or quietly repairing harnesses with fingers used to threading silk and slicing jerky. You're surprised how tender this world can be. There's violence, sure. But there's also song, memory, and the strange intimacy of people who might never see each other again but still share soup without asking. You listen to an Uzbek lullaby hummed by a young boy to his pet goat. The goat does not seem impressed. You, on the other hand, are quietly enchanted. The night grows colder than expected, and someone hands you a felt cloak embroidered with tiny silver knots. From Samarkand, they say. It'll keep out wind and gossip. You pull it tight and lie back against a bundle of cotton. The stars above are dazzling, cruel, and somehow comforting. You fall asleep to the creaking of camel joints and the soft whisper of a merchant nearby reciting poetry to the moon. Awaiting, continue. Morning comes not with bird song but with groaning. Camels protest the start of another day with the enthusiasm of a teenager being told to do chores. You stretch beneath your felt cloak, joints stiff but spirit oddly buoyant. There's something about waking up in the middle of a trade route that makes you feel like a minor character in a much bigger novel. One written in silk, dust, and the occasional sarcastic fart. Today you leave the dunes behind and climb toward rocky terrain. The path snakes through narrow valleys and under natural stone arches, like a winding scar on the earth. This is territory favored by the Sogdians, and their fingerprints are everywhere, quite literally, in some of the carvings and graffiti scratched into rock over centuries. The Sogdians don't get top billing in most history books, but don't let that fool you. These were the real MVPs of Silk Road commerce. Masters of language, brokers of impossible deals, and some of the most stylish negotiators you'll never meet. Think ancient startup founders, but with more camels and fewer performance reviews. You trudge into a cliffside village built of sun-baked brick and worn stone. The architecture is deceptively simple, but the color palette, reds, blues and shimmering greens, comes from mineral paints ground down by hand. You catch glimpses of fabric being dyed in vats the size of bathtubs. The air smells like vinegar and copper, with a top note of something sweetly fermented. A Sogdian merchant invites you into his courtyard, offers tea steeped in cinnamon and mystery and begins to talk. He tells you his name, then recites his lineage back 12 generations, half in Sogdian, half in Persian. You nod along, sipping politely, until he casually reveals that his great-great-grandfather once negotiated directly with a Tang princess over the price of a shipment of lapis lazuli. Historians still argue whether the Sogdians truly dominated Silk Road trade or merely inserted themselves at the right moments with unnerving finesse. What's not debated, they were everywhere. From China to Byzantium, their letters have been found, written in distinctive curly script, stuffed into clay jars, and hidden under floorboards when bandits came calling. A young apprentice leads you through a narrow corridor and into a storeroom lined with scrolls. Some are trade records, others contracts, a few clearly love letters that never got sent. One document mentions a shipment of 50 bolts of crimson silk, to be paid in coral and stories. You raise an eyebrow. The apprentice just grins. Outside, children chase each other through the alleys, their tunics stained with berry dye. You overhear an old woman muttering about that time the Byzantines tried to pay in glass beads, and how she still hasn't forgiven them. Another merchant shows off his wares, an assortment of jewelry, cloth, and a musical instrument shaped like a flattened teardrop. He plucks a string. It sings like longing wrapped in honey. The Sogdians didn't just move goods, they moved ideas. They carried Buddhism westward, Zoroastrianism eastward, and gave safe passage to everything from Nestorian Christianity to ancient folktales about dragons who couldn't quite commit to villainy. A mosaic in one trader's home shows a scene of a banquet with guests wearing Chinese robes, Persian hats, and Greek sandals. The host raises a toast with what looks suspiciously like a Roman goblet. You marvel at the surreal blend. One quirky detail stands out. Sogdian caravans were said to carry lucky weasels. Not as pets, mind you, these were believed to sniff out danger. Some traders swore a weasel's twitching whiskers could predict sandstorms or detect poison dates. You make a mental note to request a weasel for future journeys. Midday heat pushes everyone into shaded arcades. You duck into a silk shop where spools of dyed thread shimmer like spilled rainbows. The proprietor, an elegant woman with kohl-rimmed eyes, shows you a bolt of cloth so fine it feels like it might float away. She claims it was dyed with crushed insects and moonlight. You're 90% sure that's a metaphor. But who knows? As the afternoon stretches, the village slowly shifts into a kind of communal hum. Meals are prepared in tandem, merchants trade more stories than goods, and even the camels seem to chill out a little. You sit with a group under a woven canopy, sipping chilled rose water and listening to tales of far-off Samarkand, where minarets glitter like frozen fire and scholars debate philosophy between bites of melon. One trader shares a warning passed down from his grandmother: never trust a merchant with clean fingernails. They've never had to dig for what they sell. He shows you his own, grimy, cracked, honest. The quiet beauty of this place is in the small details. The sun-dappled stonework, the way spices are stored in embroidered pouches, the children who paint their animals with patterns for luck. You notice a cart piled high with miniature drums made of fish skin. A boy offers you one in exchange for a joke. You tell him about your camel's attitude problem. He laughs so hard he drops his apricots. By nightfall the stars blink on again, but this time you're under a proper roof. Well, a lattice one. You lie back on woven mats, warm tea in your belly, a drum under your head. Somewhere a flute plays a note so sad it makes the air shimmer. You realize you haven't thought about the end of the road in days. This isn't just travel. It's immersion. You're not a tourist here. You're a temporary thread in a living tapestry of trade, culture, and well-dressed wheeling and dealing. And as the wind sighs through the arches, you fall asleep wondering what a moonlight-dyed robe might actually feel like. Your dreams dissolve with the rising scent of sesame oil and grilled flatbread. Morning in a Sogdian village wakes gently, the metallic clink of cookware, the sleepy coo of doves on tiled roofs, and the low hum of traders rehearsing prices under their breath, like monks chanting at a marketplace altar. Today you move eastward again. As you leave the warm embrace of the Sogdian settlement, the terrain shifts under your sandals. The soft, sandy routes begin hardening into dry scrublands, then climbing into jagged hills. These are the fringes of the Pamir Mountains, often called the roof of the world. And yes, you're going to need stronger calves. As the caravan snakes higher, the air thins. Every breath is a negotiation, every step a declaration. But the view? It's absurd. You pause at a ridge and gaze over a valley glazed with fog, where thin rivers scribble across the ground like silver ink. In the far distance, peaks jab the sky like frozen lightning bolts. You take it all in, then sneeze from the altitude. Along this stretch, danger isn't just theoretical, it's geological. Rock slides are common, and one unlucky slip could turn your Grand Silk Road saga into a fossilized cautionary tale. Yet this path is crucial. These mountain passes form the highland bridges connecting Central Asia to China, and for centuries, merchants risked their necks and ankles to cross them. The path is etched with centuries of footprints. Stone cairns mark the trail every few hundred paces, many draped with faded ribbons or tiny amulets. One trader explains, "Leave something behind and the mountains might leave you alone." You contribute a lucky coin with a dent in it, whisper a silent plea and keep moving. Historians still argue whether caravans crossed these ranges in large groups or split into nimble pods to reduce risk. Either way, survival was never guaranteed. You glance at a distant ledge where the skeleton of a pack saddle sits half buried in snow. No one says anything, but everyone notices. Midday, you arrive at a mountain caravanserai clinging to the slope like a stubborn barnacle. It's less of a building, more of a stone embrace against the wind. You duck into its low-ceilinged interior, warmed by yak dung fires and the body heat of travelers who smell like old leather and ambition. You find a seat on a woven mat beside a wall covered in carved graffiti. Some are names, others crude portraits, and one very dramatic poem about missing lentils. Here, in this cold sanctuary, you meet a Buddhist monk headed west with scrolls wrapped in red silk. He offers you a cup of butter tea, a salty, creamy concoction with the consistency of melted candle, and tells you about the sacred caves of Dunhuang, where artists have been painting visions of paradise for generations. The road, he says, is also a teacher. You nod, unsure whether it's the altitude or the wisdom making you lightheaded. A merchant from Kashgar joins the circle and unrolls a tiny, meticulous map painted on treated goat skin. He points to towns you've never heard of, trade routes that branch like spider veins, and a shortcut through a gorge that probably won't kill you. You decide to stick with the main road. And here comes the fringe tidbit of the day. One traveler reveals that some caravans use trained crows to scout ahead for food and water. The logic? Crows don't die easily. If they turn around, so should you. You peer out into the cloudy sky, half hoping to spot a feathered forecaster. As night descends, you sit close to the fire, wrapped in a woolen shawl that smells faintly of goat. The stars tonight are different, closer, more aggressive. They don't twinkle, they burn. One man plays a two-stringed lute with practiced fingers, while another brews fermented yak milk in a pot he swears only smells bad the first time. You ask if anyone's ever crossed the entire Silk Road from end to end. The oldest trader chuckles. You don't cross it, he says. It crosses you. You try to act like you get it, but really your fingers are too cold for deep metaphors. Before sleep, you step outside for a final look. The wind whistles between the rocks like a warning and a lullaby. You tighten your shawl and scan the stars. Somewhere beyond those peaks lies China, rich, strange, waiting. And somewhere behind you, Persia continues its slow, perfumed dreaming. It hits you then. The Silk Road isn't a road at all. It's a web, a series of chances, dangers, customs, and cuisines. You're no longer walking across geography. You're threading through centuries of ambition, belief, and silk that might have once dressed an emperor, or wrapped a scroll now buried under snow. You sleep on stone, but dream in velvet. Your breath mists in the frigid morning air. The caravan stirs slowly like dough rising under a quilt. Around you, traders mutter into their beards, camels shiver and groan, and somewhere deep in the building, a goat bleats like it's questioning all of life's choices. You gather your pack, double-check your socks, yes, both still damp, and prepare to descend the other side of the roof of the world. The downward path is no easier than the climb. The slopes are steep, switchbacks dizzying, and the risk of tumbling into a snow-fed ravine remains uncomfortably non-zero. But gravity at least is finally on your side. And so you press on, following in the footsteps of thousands, pilgrims, poets, peddlers, all of them chasing something shimmering just out of reach. By midday, the trail levels into a high plateau freckled with low grass and alpine herbs. You pass a shepherd wrapped in fur who offers you a bite of dried cheese so tough it could serve as currency in emergencies. You thank him and chew like your life depends on it, because it might. This land, once thought too wild for commerce, now blooms with stories. In the shadow of the mountains lies a settlement built by traders who decided to stay rather than pass through. The buildings are low, their roofs covered in stone shingles, and the wind paints every surface with dust. But the people? The people are vibrant. A small market hums along the central path. You pause at a spice stall where bright yellow turmeric piles compete with blood-red saffron and green cardamom pods the size of your fingernail. A boy with charcoal-smeared hands offers you a handful of candied ginger, and you trade him a story about a Sogdian ghost camel. It's a hit. Here you learn of something remarkable. These mountain communities aren't just trade pit stops, they're cultural fusion reactors. Turkic, Persian, Chinese, and Tibetan customs swirl together, forming languages that borrow vocabulary like teenagers borrow hoodies. Meals might start with mutton dumplings and end with sweet almond soup. Even the dance styles are blended, half spin, half stomp, all joy. One mainstream historical fact comes alive as you cross paths with a Chinese envoy bearing gifts of jade figurines. He's flanked by guards in lacquered armor, and his banners ripple in the wind. He tells you he's on his way to the court of a local Khan, part of a long-standing tribute exchange that's older than many empires. You marvel at how diplomacy once traveled not by wire or tweet, but by foot and favor. As you settle near the campfire later that evening, a weathered trader leans close and tells you the tale of a merchant who once smuggled gunpowder across the high passes hidden inside clay pots labeled pickled radish. True? You ask. He winks. True enough. Historians still argue whether gunpowder spread westward by accident, espionage, or osmosis, but this story smells like pickles and peril, and you decide to believe it. The night sky here is the kind that makes you question your problems. Infinite stars. Crisp air. A silence so deep it feels like it could absorb regret. You notice a woman tracing constellations in the dirt with a stick, teaching her child that this one is the camel constellation, because even in the stars the Silk Road rides. And now for a slightly bizarre twist. One local tale claims the mountains are guarded by a snow spirit who taxes travelers in dreams. If you don't leave her an offering, dried flowers, polished stones, a single verse of poetry, she'll visit in the night and whisper all your regrets back to you twice as loud. So naturally, you compose the world's worst haiku and leave it under a cairn. Socks still damp again. Yak watches me eat old cheese. Is this enlightenment? At dawn, you trudge forward into thinner air, feeling oddly lighter, as if the mountain spirit took your worst fears and laughed at them. Further along, the trail splits briefly into a gorge that seems to bend light. Rock walls tower above you, laced with ancient carvings. Some of them Buddhist sutras, others geometric patterns, one very enthusiastic tiger. You stop at a stone basin filled with glacial melt. The water is so cold it might have a personality. You drink anyway because no one walks the Silk Road to be comfortable. Here's something unexpected. Archaeologists once found a Roman coin near this very spot. Just lying in the dirt, as if Caesar himself had taken a wrong turn on his way to the Forum. Fringe historians love to speculate. Was it traded hand to hand all the way east, or did some Roman mercenary actually wander this high with his toga flapping in the breeze? We'll probably never know, but it makes you grin thinking about it. By the time you reach the base of the pass, the land has begun to change again. Trees return, scrubby at first, then greener, taller. Birds chatter in languages you don't recognize. And the trail smells of moss and something vaguely citrusy. You arrive at another caravanserai, this one nestled near a hot spring that hisses like an old man's complaints. You soak your feet in the warm water, let your muscles sigh and realize, you're on the edge of China now. The names on lips are shifting. So are the spices. And the silk? It's not just cargo anymore. It's currency, it's religion, it's identity, woven with meaning. As the sun dips low, you lean against a warm stone, sipping barley tea. The fire crackles beside you. Somewhere, someone sings an old song in a newer dialect. You can't understand the words, but the melody feels familiar, like a path you've already walked in your sleep. And you realize with a sleepy smile, you're no longer just passing through history. You're part of it now. The dawn light spills across the foothills like melted gold, and you rise slower than usual. Your legs feel like hammered rice cakes, your lips are wind-chapped beyond redemption, and your pack seems heavier even though you swear you didn't steal that copper incense burner. Okay, maybe you borrowed it with the intention of spiritual enrichment. Today the world opens up into the Darim Basin, a vast, sun-scorched bowl of dust, salt, and secrets. You descend into this arid stretch with caution, because it doesn't forgive mistakes. If the Pamirs were a sacred trial, the desert ahead is a psychological experiment with camels. The landscape flattens into endless plains punctuated by the occasional mirage, and even those feel tired. You've entered Xinjiang, an ancient frontier where kingdoms once rose like sandcastles and vanished just as easily. The Silk Road doesn't have one road here. It forks and curls like a tangled thread dropped across the map. You choose the northern route for now, skirting the Taklamakan Desert. Locals call it the place of no return, which is less of a nickname and more of a Yelp review with 0 stars. Yet despite the danger, this region once pulsed with trade. Dotted along its edges are oasis cities like Kashgar, Kutcha, and Turpan, verdant pockets where life clings to water like a secret. You spot the first of these mirage-defying towns on the horizon, a cluster of mud brick towers wrapped in grapevine trellises and dust storms. The streets buzz with traders, musicians, and camels that look like they know all your embarrassing stories. One mainstream historical gem, Kashgar was the Silk Road's crown jewel in the west of China, an entrepot where Indian monks, Persian spice merchants, and Chinese emissaries crossed paths like ingredients in a slow-cooked stew. You hear 12 languages before you've even ordered breakfast. You dive into the city's bazaar like it's a maze designed by a caffeine-fueled architect. Shelters built from lattice would cast intricate shadows on the dusty ground. Here you find goods you didn't even know you wanted: dried rosebuds, cinnamon bark, a lute with one string and a tragic backstory. A toothless vendor wraps a scarf around your neck without asking and says, "Now you're ready." You don't know for what, but you appreciate the flair. You pause at a stall where parchment maps are painted by hand, the ink slightly smudged but full of ambition. One shows a mountain shaped like a sleeping dragon. Another depicts a land beyond the river where birds speak prophecy. You buy both, obviously. Lunch is a local delicacy: polo rice with mutton, carrots, and raisins, served in a bowl the size of your face. You sit under a grape arbor next to a man who claims to be a descendant of a Tang dynasty diplomat. He says his family still holds a secret recipe for perfume made from apricot pits and saffron. You nod politely, but you're mainly here for the rice. Later, you explore a nearby Buddhist monastery half buried in sand. Inside, the walls bloom with faded frescoes of bodhisattvas and cloud-dwelling sages. In one corner, you notice graffiti etched centuries ago, 2 names entwined by a heart. Even here, in this austere sacred space, someone was lovesick enough to mark it down forever. Romance, like trade, travels well. Historians still argue whether Buddhism arrived in China through this northern route or by sea from India. Either way, you feel its fingerprints everywhere. In the chants echoing off the cave walls, in the meticulous gestures of monks painting mandalas, even in the kindness of strangers offering you ginger tea with far too much ginger. One merchant tells you that traders in this region used to bury decoy jars of silver under fake rocks as a kind of reverse bait. The logic? Thieves, assuming they'd found a decoy, wouldn't bother digging further. Fringe? Absolutely. Genius? Possibly. You mark the idea for later, just in case your future includes decoy cheese wheels. Evening settles like silk across the sky. A caravan prepares to leave for Turpan, and you're invited to join. It's a flatter route, but don't let that fool you. It's dry, windy, and full of scorpions with trust issues. Still, the idea of moving forward pulls at you. You've tasted one city's secrets. You want more. Before you leave, an old woman ties a blue ribbon around your wrist. For protection, she says. You ask, against what? That depends on your dreams, she answers, not helpfully. You thank her anyway. The road out of Kashgar winds through rocky hills painted orange by the setting sun. You hear a flute behind you, just one note held so long it feels like a question. You don't look back. You're already dreaming of the next city, the next bite of candied walnut, the next conversation in a language you don't quite understand. And somewhere beneath your dusty feet, the Silk Road hums with memory. It remembers the emperors, the nomads, the lovers, the liars. It remembers everyone, including you. You wake to wind. Not the howling kind that rattles windows and sends carts skittering across courtyards, but a dry, determined breeze that scrapes at your cheeks and whispers ancient secrets through cracked reeds. The caravan creaks forward into the Turpan Depression, a place so low it feels like the earth is sighing inward. This land is a contradiction, one of the hottest, driest places on the Silk Road, and yet miraculously green in pockets. The miracle lies underground. Your guide explains with pride that you're walking atop a marvel, the Kara system, an ancient irrigation method using sloping tunnels to guide mountain water under the desert. Imagine reverse plumbing designed by engineers with more sand than sense and zero margin for error. You marvel at the ingenuity. No pumps. No electricity. Just gravity, grit, and thousands of years of stubborn brilliance. Historians still argue whether the Persians taught this technique to the Chinese or vice versa, but one thing is clear: you don't get grapes growing in a desert by accident. You reach the city of Turpan, the next oasis on your dusty pilgrimage. It's quieter than Kashgar, older in its bones. The buildings here are made of mud brick and patience, and the air smells like cumin and dried apricots. The sun is relentless, so everyone lives in the shadows, beneath awnings, inside grapevine trellises, or under impossibly wide-brimmed hats. A merchant in a lavender robe waves you into his stall. Try this, he says, handing you a small sun-dried tomato. You bite. It's sweet, tart, and tastes like it once had dreams. Grown with Kara's water, he says, as if that's all the explanation you need. In the market, you spot a man selling wind-etched bones, possibly goat, possibly something older. He swears they're from a time when dragons walked the dunes. Fringe nonsense? Probably. But something in his eyes says he believes it. You buy one. Not because you believe, but because belief is part of the journey. One mainstream fact dances into focus when you visit the Jauha ruins, an abandoned city carved from the earth itself, where entire buildings were sculpted straight out of a plateau. Here you walk through sunken streets, past the hollowed shells of temples and guard posts. The city died a slow death after centuries of invasions and climate shifts, but its skeleton still stands, watching over a silence thick enough to chew. As you sit on a crumbling wall, eating flatbread with sesame seeds and sipping tepid tea, you wonder what it must have felt like to be a child in this city centuries ago. Did they race across rooftops? Were they scolded for stealing pomegranates? Did they ever imagine their playground would one day become a tourist stop? The sun climbs higher, and you seek shade in a grape-drying tower. The air inside is sticky sweet, filled with the scent of thousands of raisins and slow metamorphosis. You lie back and let the scent lull you into a half-dream. In it, you're a trader with a cart full of glass beads heading east, your path lit by lanterns shaped like moons. You wake with a raisin stuck to your cheek and no regrets. Later, in the outskirts, you meet a scholar who insists that Marco Polo once passed near Turpan, but not directly through. He didn't know what he missed, she scoffs, folding laundry with one hand and balancing a pot with the other. Our dates are the best in the world. You believe her. You're chewing one as she speaks, and it tastes like sugar and sunlight. She tells you a local legend, that the Turpan Basin holds a hidden lake, fed by underground rivers and guarded by a blind lizard the size of a camel. Once every 100 years, it surfaces to sunbathe and share riddles. How do you know, you ask? She shrugs. My grandfather told me. And he never lied, except about card games. Night falls slowly in Turpan, as if reluctant to cover something so ancient. You wander through the Emin minaret, its spiral silhouette glowing under a paper-thin moon. Built in the 18th century, it towers over the flatland like a story that refuses to end. You imagine the muezzin's voice drifting over caravans, calling not just to prayer, but to attention, to wonder, to stillness. One final curiosity before sleep. You're invited into a home where the walls are painted with vines and birds. The host serves you goat stew and watermelon so cold it makes your teeth wince. You learn that some traders in Turpan used to hire song messengers, wandering singers who carried important news in coded lyrics. Like human voicemail but with better vocals. As you lie on the roof that night, belly full, brain buzzing, the stars seem sharper than usual. Maybe it's the elevation or the lack of city lights, or maybe the Silk Road just knows when you need a little magic. You spot Orion, crooked and glowing, his belt slightly off, like your own. You exhale slowly. The Keras below hums with invisible water. The air smells like old stone and honeyed dates. Somewhere in the distance, a camel sneezes, loudly, theatrically. You smile. You're still moving east, closer to the heart of Silk, closer to answers, or maybe just better questions. By now, the rhythm of the Silk Road pulses through your bones. You can predict the mood of a caravan by the way the camels grunt in the morning, tell the quality of dried figs by weight alone, and sense an approaching sandstorm before the sky even starts to bleach. You're no longer just passing through this world, you're stitched into it, like embroidery on a well-traveled saddlebag. You leave Turpan behind as the sky turns the color of kiln-fired clay. The journey ahead cuts across the Gansu Corridor, China's ancient highway, wedged between the Chilean mountains and the vast Mongolian steppe. You're heading toward Dunhuang, a name that rolls off the tongue like a secret too good to keep. The path narrows, flanked by cliffs and wind-scoured hills. You pass crumbling beacons, the remnants of Han Dynasty watchtowers once linked by signal fires and trumpet calls. These towers, early versions of text messages, warned of nomad raids or invited distant towns to trade. One mainstream historical gem. The Han Empire built this chain of fortifications to secure their expanding western frontier, turning the Silk Road into a state-sponsored superhighway long before toll booths and podcasts. Dust clings to everything including your thoughts. But then, like a revelation, Dunhuang appears, not a mirage this time but a real city wrapped in legend. You cross through its gates, past stone lions worn smooth by centuries of sand, and find yourself in a crossroads of time. Dunhuang isn't just a stop, it's a museum that accidentally became a town. And at its heart lie the Mogeo Caves. Nearly 500 grottos carved into the cliffside like a secret library whispered into stone. You enter with reverence, your footsteps muffled by age. Inside, the walls bloom with color, murals of heavenly beings, reclining Buddhas, processions of silk-robed donors frozen mid-offering. Some paintings are vivid as if they were brushed yesterday, others crumble like the memory of a half-forgotten dream. Historians still argue whether the artists who painted these masterpieces were monks, travelers, or royal artisans sent from the capital. But whoever they were, their work is breathtaking, a psychedelic mix of spirituality, politics, and paint made from crushed gemstones and tea soot. You pause in front of a fresco showing the Buddha under a jeweled tree, surrounded by lions with eyebrows that look suspiciously French. You wonder whether that was intentional or just the result of a very creative Tuesday. In one of the deeper caves, your guide lowers his voice and tells you about the Library Cave, discovered in the early 1900s, sealed off for centuries, and packed with over 50,000 manuscripts, textiles, and scrolls. A time capsule stuffed with tax records, folk songs, sutras, and the occasional grocery list. One quirky detail. Scholars found a world map showing India as a bean-shaped island and dragons floating happily off the coast of Europe. Geography, like fashion, evolves. You leave the caves blinking against the light, brain buzzing with ancient pigment. The air outside feels like another century entirely. You pass a group of students sketching the caves with charcoal and tablets, their lines shaky but sincere. One offers you a drawing of a cloud you didn't even notice. You tuck it into your satchel without a word. Back in town, Dunhuang's market is a milder version of Kashgar's chaos. Here it's more about calligraphy brushes, jade bangles, and fried dough swirls that taste like childhood. You watch a puppet show in the square, an epic about a monkey king and a moon maiden who argues a lot, and find yourself chuckling mid-yawn. In the evening you ride out to the singing sand dunes. They rise like frozen waves, each ridge kissed by dusk. You climb barefoot, the grains warm and whispering. As you slide down, the dunes let out a deep, eerie hum, a natural phenomenon caused by vibrating quartz grains. To you, it sounds like the earth remembering a lullaby. Your guide tells you a tale. Centuries ago, a Tang princess fled across these dunes, her silk robes trailing stardust. Her horse died of thirst, but she sang her way to survival, luring birds who brought her water in their beaks. It's true, he says. Or it should be. One last treat before bed, camel milk yogurt with honey and pistachios. It's creamier than you expect and refreshingly sour, like a snack with opinions. You sit beneath lanterns made of fish skin watching shadows dance. A traveling monk joins you briefly. He's barefoot, bearded, and amused by your attempts at eating gracefully with chopsticks. The road, he says, does not care how clever you are. Only how open you remain. You nod, yogurt-drunk and star-touched. There's wisdom in that. That night, you sleep at a guest house with a mural of constellations above your bed. The stars blink lazily through a paper window. You dream of cliffs turning into libraries, of sand singing prayers, of dragons that draw maps and monks who forget the endings of stories but never the beginnings. You're halfway through the Silk Road now. And the road, it's starting to whisper your name. Morning rolls over the Gansu corridor like honey, slow, golden, and not quite sure whether it wants to start the day. You stretch under a reed mat ceiling, the scent of last night's sandalwood still lingering. Outside, Dunhuang yawns. Merchants set up stalls with one hand and sip jasmine tea with the other. You take your time packing as if the next leg of the journey will wait for you. It won't. Today you push beyond the familiar, deeper into the empire's reach toward the iron spine of China proper. The road twists like a calligraphy stroke, looping past the human pass, the Jade Gate. It's not much to look at now, just a lonely square tower of baked clay hunkered in the desert. But once, it was the official gateway between China and everything else. This was where envoys were inspected, tribute was taxed, and foreigners were frowned at, politely but firmly. You are now leaving the empire, the wind seems to say, or maybe entering depending on your direction. One mainstream fact? This pass was part of the Han Dynasty's effort to regulate Silk Road trade as early as the 2nd century BCE. They even installed bureaucrats in the desert. Imagine being promoted from palace scribe to sandstorm liaison. Historians still argue whether this gate marked a symbolic border or a true customs checkpoint. Either way it mattered. And standing here, with the sun pressing down and the wind chewing your robe, it's hard not to feel the weight of a million footsteps before yours. You trudge on, skirting the edge of the Heshi corridor, a fertile strip that once fed entire armies. Wheat fields shimmer to the south, fed by glacier melt from the Chilean mountains. You stop at a village where people still sing harvest songs in a dialect so old it sounds like a cousin of thunder. There you stumble into a shrine where offerings include smartphones with cracked screens, left beside incense sticks and melon seeds. They pray for better Wi-Fi, your guide jokes. Maybe. Or maybe the gods just like updates. You board a riverboat at Zhangye, floating down a canal once used for silk shipments. The ride is calm, almost lazy, until the captain points out a stretch of bank where the mud reveals old porcelain shards after heavy rains. You spot one, blue, curved, and marked with a stylized phoenix. You don't pocket it. Not out of virtue but because you sense it still belongs to the river. You pass the giant Buddha of Zhangye, tucked inside a wooden temple that creaks like a grandfather stretching. The statue is over 35 meters long, reclining with one elbow propped as if casually watching the centuries go by. Locals claim Genghis Khan once slept beside it, using the Buddha's sandal as a pillow. Quirky myth? Definitely. But it paints a memorable picture. In town you're treated to a feast of boiled mutton, sour plum wine, and something the chef calls cloud cake. It's pale and fluffy, with just enough sweetness to make your eyebrows rise. You've eaten like royalty and peasant alike on this road, but cloud cake? That's a new one. Later, at a calligraphy stall, an old woman writes your name in seal script on a scroll. Her brushwork is so precise you're afraid to breathe. She tells you the ink is made from pine soot and pearl dust, and she once wrote letters for a Tang prince who wept like a child when his love moved to Persia. He never sent them, she adds, but I still have them. In a box. With cat bones. You don't ask follow-up questions. That night, you sleep in a room overlooking the Dansha landforms, layered hills of red, orange, and violet that look like the earth got tired of beige and decided to paint. Moonlight shifts across the ridges like silk over a dancer's shoulder. You watch for hours, hypnotized by geology. In your dreams, the hills open like scrolls and stories spill out, of warriors who drank rainwater from skulls, of nuns who smuggled ink in their sleeves, of children who played chess with ghosts at the foot of Buddhas. You wake at dawn to the sound of clanging, blacksmiths in the village forging tools. Or maybe bells to call the faithful. Either way, it feels like the road clearing its throat. You eat breakfast standing up, steamed buns and pickled mustard greens, and then hit the trail again. You're eastbound now, and you feel it in your bones. The air thickens. The sky grows crowded. The mountains to your left are taller now, and snow still clings to their shoulders in defiance of the season. You meet a group of pilgrims heading the other direction, westbound. They wear patched robes and walk with the gait of those who've seen things they still haven't digested. You exchange nods, bread, and a joke about donkey flatulence. One of them presses a charm into your hand, a tiny bell carved from sandalwood. For dreams, he says. Then he's gone. You don't know what it means yet, but you tie it to your pack anyway. The Silk Road is narrowing. Not in distance, but in purpose. You're nearing the dynastic core, where trade becomes politics, where silk is no longer a marvel but a message. You press on. By now, the dust of the Silk Road has worked its way into your skin. You no longer brush it off, you wear it like an heirloom. The rhythm of travel is your heartbeat, and the creak of camel harnesses could lull you to sleep. But today the road changes, not its direction but its feeling. You're entering Xi'an, though centuries ago it was called Chang'an, the city of eternal peace. And as eternal things go, it's had more name changes, palace fires and population swings than a medieval soap opera. But the bones of greatness remain. Your first glimpse of the city comes from a hill, a vast sprawl cradled by walls thick enough to race chariots on, because they used to. One mainstream historical fact. During the Tang dynasty, Chang'an was one of the largest, most cosmopolitan cities on earth, rivaling Baghdad and Constantinople. Over 1 million residents, dozens of ethnic neighborhoods and more tea shops than temples. And that's saying something. You enter through the western gate, alongside traders, monks, and a man who claims his ferret can read fortunes. The guards wave you in with only a glance. You're clearly seasoned or at least dusty enough to pass for it. The city breathes with motion. Paper lanterns sway. Rice hawkers shout. Courtesans flirt through fans while scribes argue over ink viscosity. The smell of vinegar pork mingles with sandalwood and horses. It's chaos, yes, but refined chaos. Like if a bazaar and a library had a baby and raised it on poetry. You make your way to the Great Wild Goose Pagoda, a towering brick prism built in the 7th century to house Buddhist scriptures brought from India. The monk Xuanzang, who inspired Journey to the West, built this place to preserve what he'd gathered during his 17-year trek across deserts and war zones. His journey was basically the Silk Road's greatest hits album. Scholars still debate whether he brought back 657 or 657 and a half scrolls, the half likely chewed by a goat near Samarkand. Inside the pagoda, the air smells like old parchment and ambition. You climb the stairs slowly, pausing to trace your fingers along grooves worn by other pilgrims, some of them merchants like you, hoping for protection, a good deal, or maybe just decent weather. You reach the top. The view? Sprawling. Temples dot the horizon like punctuation in a holy sentence. But Chang'an isn't just temples and treaties. It's entertainment. You're invited to a shadow puppet show performed by artists who claim their family has done this since the Sui dynasty. The puppets dance, duel, and flirt behind silk screens while a musician plucks a 2-stringed eru like it's got secrets. You're enchanted until a puppet dragon sets fire to a paper palace, possibly on purpose. The crowd cheers anyway. At dinner, you sit with scholars from Korea, traders from India, and a Persian astrologer who insists the moon is hollow and filled with vinegar. You raise an eyebrow, but hey, it's not your moon. The food is a parade. Lamb stewed in cinnamon, sweet lotus root, fermented tofu that smells like guilt but tastes like heaven, and flatbread so flaky it practically apologizes when you chew it. A Tang poet at your table recites a verse between bites. In Chang'an spring, the peach blossoms fall like debts. Yet I still drink. You laugh. Then you write that one down. Later you pass through the Muslim quarter, alive with spices and song. Skewers of cumin lamb sizzle beside walnut pastries that ooze honey. Here, traders from as far as Damascus have settled, marrying locals, opening shops, and planting their languages into the soil like heirloom seeds. One quirky detail? There's a centuries-old market code carved in stone at the entrance, listing fair pricing, acceptable behavior, and what happens if you water down wine, public shaming and confiscation of your best sheep. Justice apparently had excellent taste. You duck into a tea house where each table has its own tiny stove. A boy no older than 12 brews your cup, using a technique involving 3 teapots and a flick of the wrist that would impress any Vegas magician. The tea tastes of smoke, plum, and something you can't name, but it warms you deeper than expected. In a quieter street, you find a shop that sells only ink stones. The owner tells you which one was favored by a eunuch who once wrote a love letter to a general, then jumped into a koi pond when the general married a poetess. The koi apparently were unimpressed. That night, you attend a moon festival gathering near the city's southern gate. Lanterns rise into the sky, hundreds of glowing orbs drifting upward like memories too stubborn to sink. A child hands you one to release. You hesitate. What would you wish for? Your lantern carries no inscription. Just warm air and whatever you've gathered from the road. A little wisdom, a few bruises, a stolen poem or two. The city hums beneath you. But your eyes drift east. The journey isn't over. Chang'an was always the destination for many. But for you, it's a turning point. You sleep under paper windows painted with cranes and tigers. Outside, the night wind rattles wind chimes made of coins. Inside, your dreams are loud with color and quiet with peace. Tomorrow you'll leave again. The Silk Road doesn't end in cities. It ends in people. And you, dear traveler, are becoming one of its living maps. By now, the dust of the Silk Road has worked its way into your skin. You no longer brush it off, you wear it like an heirloom. The rhythm of travel is your heartbeat, and the creak of camel harnesses could lull you to sleep. But today the road changes, not its direction but its feeling. You're entering Xi'an, though centuries ago it was called Chang'an, the city of eternal peace. And as eternal things go, it's had more name changes, palace fires and population swings than a medieval soap opera. But the bones of greatness remain. Your first glimpse of the city comes from a hill, a vast sprawl cradled by walls thick enough to race chariots on, because they used to. One mainstream historical fact. During the Tang dynasty, Chang'an was one of the largest, most cosmopolitan cities on earth, rivaling Baghdad and Constantinople. Over 1 million residents, dozens of ethnic neighborhoods and more tea shops than temples. And that's saying something. You enter through the western gate, alongside traders, monks, and a man who claims his ferret can read fortunes. The guards wave you in with only a glance. You're clearly seasoned or at least dusty enough to pass for it. The city breathes with motion. Paper lanterns sway. Rice hawkers shout. Courtesans flirt through fans while scribes argue over ink viscosity. The smell of vinegar pork mingles with sandalwood and horses. It's chaos, yes, but refined chaos. Like if a bazaar and a library had a baby and raised it on poetry. You make your way to the Great Wild Goose Pagoda, a towering brick prism built in the 7th century to house Buddhist scriptures brought from India. The monk Xuanzang, who inspired Journey to the West, built this place to preserve what he'd gathered during his 17-year trek across deserts and war zones. His journey was basically the Silk Road's greatest hits album. Scholars still debate whether he brought back 657 or 657.5 scrolls, the half likely chewed by a goat near Samarkand. Inside the pagoda, the air smells like old parchment and ambition. You climb the stairs slowly, pausing to trace your fingers along grooves worn by other pilgrims, some of them merchants like you, hoping for protection, a good deal, or maybe just decent weather. You reach the top. The view? Sprawling. Temples dot the horizon like punctuation in a holy sentence. But Chang'an isn't just temples and treaties. It's entertainment. You're invited to a shadow puppet show performed by artists who claim their family has done this since the Sui dynasty. The puppets dance, duel, and flirt behind silk screens while a musician plucks a 2-stringed eru like it's got secrets. You're enchanted until a puppet dragon sets fire to a paper palace, possibly on purpose. The crowd cheers anyway. At dinner, you sit with scholars from Korea, traders from India, and a Persian astrologer who insists the moon is hollow and filled with vinegar. You raise an eyebrow, but hey, it's not your moon. The food is a parade. Lamb stewed in cinnamon, sweet lotus root, fermented tofu that smells like guilt but tastes like heaven, and flatbread so flaky it practically apologizes when you chew it. A Tang poet at your table recites a verse between bites. In Chang'an spring, the peach blossoms fall like debts. Yet I still drink. You laugh. Then you write that one down. Later you pass through the Muslim quarter, alive with spices and song. Skewers of cumin lamb sizzle beside walnut pastries that ooze honey. Here, traders from as far as Damascus have settled, marrying locals, opening shops, and planting their languages into the soil like heirloom seeds. One quirky detail? There's a centuries-old market code carved in stone at the entrance, listing fair pricing, acceptable behavior, and what happens if you water down wine. Public shaming and confiscation of your best sheep. Justice apparently had excellent taste. You duck into a tea house where each table has its own tiny stove. A boy no older than 12 brews your cup, using a technique involving 3 teapots and a flick of the wrist that would impress any Vegas magician. The tea tastes of smoke, plum, and something you can't name, but it warms you deeper than expected. In a quieter street, you find a shop that sells only ink stones. The owner tells you which one was favored by a eunuch who once wrote a love letter to a general, then jumped into a koi pond when the general married a poetess. The koi apparently were unimpressed. That night, you attend a moon festival gathering near the city's southern gate. Lanterns rise into the sky, hundreds of glowing orbs drifting upward like memories too stubborn to sink. A child hands you one to release. You hesitate. What would you wish for? Your lantern carries no inscription. Just warm air and whatever you've gathered from the road. A little wisdom, a few bruises, a stolen poem or two. The city hums beneath you. But your eyes drift east. The journey isn't over. Chang'an was always the destination for many. But for you? It's a turning point. You sleep under paper windows painted with cranes and tigers. Outside, the night wind rattles wind chimes made of coins. Inside, your dreams are loud with color and quiet with peace. Tomorrow you'll leave again. The Silk Road doesn't end in cities. It ends in people. And you, dear traveler, are becoming one of its living maps. The road becomes quieter now, not in a way that feels empty, but in that soft, final movement of a symphony sort of way. You're leaving Chengdu behind, trailing a path that hugs the fertile Yangtze Plains, heading further east toward the sea. Your bones ache like old hinges, and your boots are 2 meals away from becoming sandals. But still, you walk. It's early morning. The mist wraps the countryside like a sleepy blanket, and rice paddies mirror the sky in silver sheets. Water buffalo grunt in the distance. A farmer waves at you with muddy hands and the calm confidence of someone who's never heard of inflation. You wave back even though your own hands are stained with ink and dried apricot jam. You're approaching the final commercial hub of your journey, the port city of Hangzhou. Once the capital of the Southern Song dynasty, it's where the Silk Road doesn't quite end, it just exhales. This is the place where caravans surrender their goods to wooden ships, where silk flows not by camel but by sail. As you arrive, the scent of salt water hits you first, briny, sharp, unmistakable. Then the clatter of hooves gives way to the creak of ship masts, and the architecture shifts subtly. Taller buildings, narrower streets, more merchants shouting in 6 dialects at once. Hangzhou's Grand Canal, the oldest and longest man-made waterway in the world, slices through the city like a blue ribbon. You cross a stone bridge and pause to watch barges glide beneath, each one stacked high with porcelain, rice, tea bricks, and yes, still more silk. Silk in bolts, silk in sacks, silk wrapped around scrolls like secret whispers. One mainstream fact: Hangzhou was once described by Marco Polo as the finest and noblest city in the world. Whether or not he actually made it here is up for debate. Historians still argue whether his accounts were first-hand observations or stitched-together tavern tales. But you get it. The man had a point. The markets here are intense. You're nearly trampled by a courier carrying goose feathers. A child offers to shine your boots for a song. An elderly woman with no teeth tries to sell you a map to an undiscovered spice route that involves a lot of swimming. You politely decline. In a harborside tea house, you sip a cup of Longjing Dragon Well tea grown just west of the city. The taste is grassy, sweet, and oddly nostalgic. A scholar nearby claims that the Emperor Qianlong once brewed tea here with his own hands. You raise an eyebrow. The scholar nods sagely and adds, badly? He burned the leaves. Hangzhou hums with innovation. You're shown a silk weaving mill that runs on a system of foot treadles and water wheels. The clatter is deafening but mesmerizing. The owner explains how recent methods allow for double-sided embroidery, where 2 distinct images are stitched into opposite sides of the same cloth. A crane on one, a tiger on the other. Turn the silk, change the story. A quirky fact? You stumble into a small apothecary that sells tiger essence ink, supposedly made by mixing soot, musk, and tiger bone powder to boost writing courage. The shopkeeper tells you poets use it when confessing love or asking for tax extensions. You do not ask how the tigers feel about this. That night you walk along West Lake, where willows dip their leaves into the water like lazy calligraphers. Poets from centuries past wrote about this view with such devotion that the scenery itself seems aware of the attention. The moon reflects on the lake with theatrical poise, as if posing for an imperial portrait. You sit by the water's edge, watching lovers float by in carved wooden boats. A musician plays a guqin, 7 strings stretched across polished wood, the notes trembling like silk in wind. You don't recognize the melody, but it coils around your heart in a way that makes you pause. Behind you, the warehouses buzz with late-night loading. Ships from Korea, Japan, and Southeast Asia wait in port, their hulls gaping to swallow silk, jade, spices, and dried fish. You watch as crates are sealed, stamped, and rolled toward wooden gangways. The Silk Road doesn't stop here, it spills into the sea. And suddenly the question hits you, what now? You've followed the thread from sand to stone to salt water. You've traded with Mongols, drunk with Persians, bargained with Tang poets and Buddhist monks. You've seen stars over Kashgar and fog in the Chinling. Your pockets are fuller than when you began, but not with gold. You carry poems, flavors, a rabbit charm, stories you couldn't make up if you tried. You carry silence, laughter. There's a phrase scratched into the wall of an old inn near the port. The road ends only when you forget it. You trace it with your fingers, then turn away. You'll stay in Hangzhou a few days. Rest, repack. Maybe ship some goods back west. Maybe write that poem about the peacock merchant and the screaming ferret. Maybe not. The Silk Road has ended. But you're not done walking. Not quite yet. A breeze comes off the water. Not strong. Just enough to make the lanterns sway along the docks like sleepy fireflies caught in indecision. You stand there, not exactly waiting for anything, but not quite ready to move either. The journey, for all intents and purposes, is over. But that breeze carries with it the scent of juniper and old rope, salt and cinnamon bark. The kind of scent that whispers something you didn't expect. That the Silk Road was never really about getting somewhere. It was about becoming something along the way. Your last few days in Hangzhou unfold like the final pages of a book you don't want to finish. Each scene feels slowed, almost ceremonial. You spend a morning wandering the Silk Museum, touching swatches of cloth that date back over 1,000 years. One is so delicate, it's kept behind glass, fluttering in the air like the ghost of a scarf. The curator tells you it was discovered in a tomb, wrapped around a clay pillow. Why silk for the dead? To ensure pleasant dreams, she says. Makes you wonder who first thought of tucking sleep into fabric. Later, in a corner tea house with cracked blue tiles and a lazy ceiling fan, you sit across from a man who claims to be a descendant of Zhang Qian, the Han Dynasty diplomat who first opened China's doors to the West. His family still tells stories passed down like heirlooms. You ask him what the most valuable thing Zhang Qian brought back from his travels was. He thinks for a long time, then says, a new word. Possibility. That night, over dinner, some fish steamed in lotus leaf and a soup that tastes like history, your host shares a rumor. He says there's a reverse road emerging. Traders from the east taking spices west, silk ships sailing backward against the current of centuries. Soon, he says, Hangzhou might be the beginning. Historians still argue whether this really happened in large numbers or whether it's just the hopeful echo of a world looking for symmetry. But you don't care. You believe it. Roads don't vanish, they just wear different names. Before you leave, you return once more to West Lake. You're not alone. An old woman sits near you on the stone bench, her hair silver and piled like a dumpling. She feeds sesame crackers to turtles and hums a tune that sounds suspiciously like the one you heard on the guqin. She asks if you've come far. You tell her yes. She nods, then says, don't let the end of the road be the end of your seeing. You want to ask what she means, but she's already halfway across the bridge by the time you find your voice again. You rise early the next morning. The sun paints the sky in a soft apricot blush. You pack lightly, less silk, more memory. The paper rabbit charm is still tied to your wrist, its ears bent now, its lightning bolts faded to soft smudges. You consider taking it off, then decide not to. As you pass the last merchant's stall, the vendor offers you something unusual. A mirror made of polished bronze engraved with 2 caravans passing each other beneath a full moon. For the road ahead, she says. You smile. The mirror reflects a version of you that looks older, perhaps a little wiser. definitely dustier. You take one last breath of Hangzhou's humid perfume, tea leaves, charcoal, star anise and thyme. Then with no fanfare you turn inland once again. Not back. Not forward. Just onward. You walk. And with each step the Silk Road remembers your feet. So now your journey settles. Let the colors of the desert, the clang of caravan bells, the rustle of silk bolts and whispers of old poets all gently fade behind your closed eyes. You've walked thousands of miles tonight, through amber sands, across snow-capped ranges, over jade-colored rivers. You've traded stories in tea houses, crossed paths with emperors, monks, smugglers and dreamers. Each one left something with you, a thread woven into the cloth of your memory. And like all good cloth, it doesn't unravel when the journey ends. It softens. It warms. You can almost feel it now, the gentle weight of a silk robe on your shoulders. The scent of temple incense lingering just behind your ear. A donkey braying softly in the distance, somewhere far away but not quite forgotten. Let your breathing slow with the rhythm of caravan steps. In and out. In and out. The kind of breathing that feels like walking in your sleep. And if, somewhere in your dreams, you find yourself back in a spice market, or catching the eye of a stranger over a shared meal, or watching the sun rise over the Pamirs, well, don't be surprised. Some journeys are too beautiful to stay only in waking hours. Good night, traveler. Sleep well. Thank you. I'm honored to have walked this long, dreamy road with you. If you ever want another journey, through ancient cities, haunted forests, or even outer space, just say the word. Until then, rest easy, fellow traveler.